Hi, I'm Chris. I created and designed React for Brotherman Games, a game that I'm very proud of, and now I'm working on a game called Kyoukai, a ISO RPG inspired TCG. Although I'm not 100% sure it's going to be released as a TCG, it's designed as one. So I've been thinking lately about, after doing a ton of work on this thing, getting it playable from a game design perspective, and then also getting the Steam demo live. So it's like a little bit of a visual novel that also teaches you how to play. Check it out if you're interested. Just go to Steam, search for Kyoukai. It's the only result that you'll get, pretty much. And you can also check it out on Itch.io if you don't have that. It is PC only. So yeah, if you're interested, try it out. You can learn how to play, learn a little bit about the lore that we've written for all this, and see some of the art that my artist and I have worked on, and hear some of the music that I've worked on. It's been a big project, and I thought today I would record something talking about why I'm even doing something this stupidly ambitious with so few reasons to do it, I guess. But, you know, that's kind of how all things end up being, I think, a lot of the time, if you don't have crazy funding, which we do not have. So Kyoukai is something that I've been working on for like a decade now. A quick rundown on just what Kyoukai is in general. 1v1 dueling game, as per most TCGs. And it is played on a shared 5x5 diamond. So if you imagine a second one of these mats on the other side, you have a 40 card deck and a leader card that is called an entrant, an extra deck, or it's not a sideboard. An extra deck is a Yu-Gi-Oh concept that Magic, I think, doesn't have. Some other card games have one, but it is essentially like cards that you always have access to that are essentially always in your hand. And you start with your leader in the bottom corner of the board. I'm not going to get too deep into the intricacies of how the game actually works now, because you can just try the tutorial to see how that works, and this is going to be more about how the game even happened in the first place. So you start like this, you draw a hand of 5, and you can only play cards into this zone and this zone. They come in tapped. You can only play them next to your untapped guys. In Kyoukai, it's called ready and resting, so this is ready, this is resting. There's stuff that comes in and automatically readies itself, so you can play into more zones. But every card in the game you have to play into an open zone that is bordering your ready gate, or your ready card. So that's the general way the game works. Everything kind of moves and attacks, so every turn I can tap something that's untapped to move, and then either attack or use its skill, which is the bottom effect. So in that sense, it is very strategy RPG-ish. A lot of the rules borrow from strategy RPGs, which is, I think, one of the first things I want to talk about, which is a card game is not really about complexity or freshness in the rules. So I think a lot of people, now that card games are so established, have this thing where, if you can't really relate the rules of your game to existing card games, it gets kind of hard to teach people because they're not really interested in that. They want to learn, they want to see new cards, right? So making a game very Magic-like and making custom Magic decks are both very popular ways to design cards. That if you want to design cards, those are popular ways to get cards that you designed out there. It's easier to kind of give a take on an existing game than it is to build a brand new thing. And so as you can see from this board, the idea of cards that have physical presence and a shared board is difficult. It's difficult to teach people. It's difficult to get people to want to learn it. And so one of the most important things was finding a way to kind of give people an anchor for a lot of the rules. And this game does that by doing two things. The first one is being very upfront that it is an isometric RPG. The diagonal cards, besides being very visually impactful, which I'll get into later about why they're diagonal, and then the cards being on a physical grid like an ISO RPG means that you can just tell people it's like Disgaea, or it's like Final Fantasy Tactics. Every unit you can use at once per turn to move and then either attack or use one of its skills. And so that's a very good anchor for people, because I think most people that play card games have experienced a strategy RPG, even if it's not diagonal, like Advance Wars or Fire Emblem, then you know how that generally works, right? Or Valkyria Chronicles, which is almost that. But a little different. The second thing is that this game has Yu-Gi-Oh chain links. So red cards are quick effects. Skills that have a red box on the bottom, these are quick effects too. It uses the Yu-Gi-Oh chain link system, so if you know how to play both, then you know that it's the magic stack but without interrupting. So once both players decline to respond to something, it immediately resolves backwards. There's a ton of examples of that in the tutorial. That's like the main thing it tries to teach. In that sense, a lot of these rules are not that new. And so that makes it much easier to teach people that have played a card game before how to play Kyoukai as well. And so providing those anchors and coming up with like a good synergistic like brand that encompasses like a lot of the rules and a lot of the visual presence and like a lot of the strategy, and just being able to say like this is like that thing you like is huge for a product, especially one that wants to have multiple sets and stuff like that. So I think that's something that I latched onto pretty early. It's one of the reasons why I thought it was worth pursuing this, because I was like, well, a diagonal card is new. And this actually has worked a lot, which is the next thing I'm going to talk about, which is just like visual presence or like the way that a game pops on the table. When I first started Kyoukai, it used to be called Shobu. And the cards were just straight up and down, regular, like turn at 45 degrees, right? And the design I thought was pretty clean, but it was very normal. Actually, let me pull that up now so you can see what I'm talking about, because the original Kyoukai cards were not that interesting. This is kind of what they looked like back then. Yeah, like this. Like here's Wandering Lion. Originally what happened, and the way that React got made, actually, let me talk about that, is that this game used to be called Shobu. I brought it to Proto Atlanta and was showing it around and kind of talking to people, getting advice, and pitching it a little bit. And Ming picked it up immediately. He liked it a lot. He liked the core of the game, that it was like a grid-based tactical game with quick effects in it. And so together we turned it into a game that he could market, which essentially means it had to become a board game. And in the process of becoming a board game, there were two main sticking points, I think, on the way in that I was like into at the beginning, but I accept now as like requirements for a product. And to be honest, I think also just makes the product better in reality, that I was kind of resistant to at the start, which is just the first one being that he wanted a lot of tokens. So board game players want a bunch of little pieces to move around and flick around in their hands. Of course, I'm even now just like hand shuffling and moving cards around. And adding a bunch of tokens to a game where, you know, as a Yu-Gi-Oh player, as like a Magic player, as a Pokemon, like a big TCG guy, I play a lot of, I liked Digimon, I liked Faria, if you've heard of Faria, and Duelist with a Y, those latter two being digital games. I really wanted to make a game where you just had 40 cards, where it was just not 40 necessarily, but it was just cards, right? As few components as possible. But I was not fully convinced, but I designed it that way anyways, as requested, in part because he was very correct about just how much a game needs to stand out. Like a 5x5 grid that's a rectangle with just regular cards moving around on it is not really that interesting from far away. You see people playing cards on a grid and you kind of just walk past it, right? It's not super exciting. And if you've seen React, you know it's very different from this in general, but also the game pops a lot. So these tokens actually do add a lot to making the game feel like a game, and he was absolutely right to do it. We use the tokens in a bunch of cool ways. There's like a dancer that like every time he moves, he leaves behind a token, so that you like have like trails of tokens behind him. And as you can see, the game is on a 6x5 grid, so that's a little different too. That was like part one of learning how important it was for your game to look good from far away. And the second thing, as you can see in this picture, is the standees. So React has standees that are semi-optional. They are in the collector's edition and not in the regular edition. But the standees are big because they make the game look crazy from far away. And it makes it very obvious what's happening to like a first-time viewer, that like here are these units that are moving around. And then even on top of that, the standees help give the game that vertical height, so that like even when you're really far away, you can see that something's happening. And the way that they move around and the way that like summons have a different height than the entrance, or the artists in this game, does a lot for making the game easier to learn and easier to see, and nicer to look at. And it feels like more of a product, right? And so realizing those two things had done so much, you know, just going to cons and pitching the game to people, it was immediately obvious that the standees were doing a lot of the heavy lifting of getting people to sit down. And when I realized that, well, I wasn't thinking about Kyoukai at the time. Shobu had basically turned into this, and it wasn't until we finished and my hands were free and my time started to open up again, and I was thinking about the work that we did on React and realizing how different it was from the original idea that I had, even though the core is the same. The core spirit of the game is pretty much what I wanted. So much of it was so different that I wanted to go back to the drawing board and start working on it again by myself. And so Kyoukai is representative of that. It's like me going back to Shobu. And by the way, the reason why both games don't use the name Shobu anymore, even though I was originally going to call it Shobu, is that there's another game called Shobu that's very good. And it started to review really well while we were working on it. And we're like, well, we can't use this name anymore because it'll just be too awkward. So we changed it to React, and I changed this to Kyoukai as per my naming sense and Ming's naming sense. And so that's where it is now. Actually, I think the logo for Shobu is around here. Well, the logo for Shobu is actually almost... Oh, yeah, here it is. Oh, yeah, here it is. Here's the Shobu logo. You can see that I made. And then I worked with my artist, Mark, since we started to take Kyoukai more seriously. And now we're here instead of there. And I'm very happy with this current logo. Once I realized how important the table presence was, I realized we had to do something crazy. But I wanted to, with my own game, to stick to just being cards, right? I wanted to be able to sell it as just cards. Although you do need a mat now because the diagonal grid is actually kind of hard to keep track of. If you played Yu-Gi-Oh! You could put a field center in the middle and track it, but I've tried with my friends and it's very difficult. So you want the 5x5 grid. I drew this grid with a Sharpie. You can actually see the corner zones go off the side of the mat. That's something I'm actually not that worried about. If you summon stuff there, you can just put it there on a shared grid and just kind of go over the sides a little bit, but it does imply there's an issue with regular mat sizes for this game. There's a world where we actually print the mats so that you put them sideways with each other so that there's more room on the corners, but in reality it might just be fine as it is. I realize it's at that point that, like, yeah, the cards had to stand out from far away and something had to stop people walking by, and turning everything sideways actually does a good job of it. That's already been proven a couple times where I'm playing with my friends at local stores and people, like, a bunch of people just stop and be like, oh, those cards are sideways, and that's like a good enough reason for people to stop and ask what the game is, for me to like hand them a field center or like a token or something, and ask them if they want to check it out. Go ahead and check it out. So I think that's been a good brand identity thing, and it also ties very well into the isometric RPG references everywhere else. So all those things together kind of create like a really nice brand that I'm actually pretty happy with now, and I'm trying to center the marketing around, but I'm not 100% sure how to do that. Some additional words on how we're doing this project. None of us really have like a ton of money, and there's no big funding source for this. So this has been a lot of, I guess, like the indie experience, right? Of just like making everything ourselves, trying to get by really quickly. This like sketch-like art, this like level of sketch art is actually, it's very good that I think it's like super helpful that we're able to do this. This is like a pencil drawing that we scanned in and did some photo editing on for the lines to look sharper. But being able to use art like this has been nice because I've been able to pay the artist less because it doesn't take him a crazy amount of time just to get these ideas down. And his sketching style is just super good. Like Mark's sketching style is amazing. And it's done a lot for making sure that we can, you know, just get the ideas onto the paper so that we can start making stuff. And so yeah, I'm super happy with all of his design work and his artwork, and we've got like a big story. You can read the first chapter on the website too. You can go ahead and read this chapter 1 if you want, and see if you're interested in that part of it, because the Steam client will also, the digital client will also have some lore cutscenes similar to the tutorial, but like about the story. So there's a bunch of stuff. We have a lot of different things we want to do with this, and so you can kind of see this is just like a lot of us doing work and hoping it leads us somewhere, I guess. Now the ISO RPG thing is kind of like the core of what we're trying to work around to make sure that we're doing something sellable. I think at this point the next step is going to be releasing something on Kickstarter, and I think we've been having issues with the idea of like, well, do we have a way to finish the art ahead of a Kickstarter launch, because doing the Kickstarter to get the art is not really how things work anymore Kickstarter wise. You need a product you can sell, so there's a good chance that we do the Kickstarter as like a living card game with like an alpha set where you get the cards with this art, but they're still like printed, like real printed cards, and they're marked as like legal forever, but you can think of like this early art as like an alternate art, like an alpha exclusive, Kickstarter exclusive early art, and maybe that's something you guys would be interested in. So leave in the comments if something that feels like that would be interesting to you guys, if you'd be interested in buying something like that. If the TCG takes off, then they remain legal for like any like sanctioned play in the future. Obviously you can just use them at home for fun no matter what I say, but they would remain playable for forever, just with like that art. Even though the cards might like change a little bit, we're not planning to do like a crazy amount of erratas, but in between like a Kickstarter with like an early game version of the game, and a true release with final art, I want to reserve the ability to like change things around balance wise, like change a number here and there if I have to. Although obviously I prefer if the game that you get from a Kickstarter like that is actually the final rule set. The art really is the main thing, and we have like 4 sets planned, and the first set actually is pretty well worked out now. Like a lot of these effects I don't think will ever change, except for a number here and there. So maybe actually before we get to Kickstarter anyways, that'll be finalized, but there's 181 cards that we want to have for the first set, and I'm done with about like a little over half, like 100 of them at least. And I have more than enough ideas, it's just like a refinement and stuff like that. As far as how we actually make these cards, that's a fun story too, because there's an Excel spreadsheet that takes the Google Sheet and makes them into cards. So I can talk a little bit about that. I actually released this tool, I can't remember how I released it. I think it was because I made like Queen's Blood in real life in like a very playable way. You can just like turn like a Yu-Gi-Oh mat or a Magic mat sideways to get like a grid that's 2, 3, 4, 5 by 3 and play Queen's Blood on it. Queen's Blood cards were also made with a Excel spreadsheet, and the Excel spreadsheet, actually, are the Queen's Blood cards here in projects? They are. So yeah, here are the Queen's Blood cards. I think they look pretty good. If you've played Queen's Blood before, you know that the game is asymmetrical. You might not have thought about it before, but depending on which side you're sitting on, you actually have to mirror the cards' active ranges. So like for this one, where they're asymmetrical. And so there's like, I ended up setting it up so that there's like a castle token that you put on the table, and you use the left or the right range depending on where the castle token is related to you. And that makes it really smooth to play. So yeah, I made a physical Queen's Blood in like a week or less, I think, and just put it online for free. You can try it out if you want. Just come here to alabastergoldfish.com/IRLQB, and you can just print it out and play it. The spreadsheet I released on Twitter too, that you can like just use it. I had like a little bit about how to use it yourself, but essentially it takes advantage of the fact that Excel macros can be used to export a graph as a JPG, because of course you would need Excel to be able to do that, right? So here we've got essentially a graph. So this is a chart object, and on it is a picture. And you can actually make a picture in Excel worth a cell, which is a very funny thing you're allowed to do. You can make a picture object, and then, so this is going to turn into a little bit of an Excel tutorial now. You can have a picture, have a formula that's equal to some cells. And so now this picture will show essentially a screen capture of those cells from now on. So and it'll even stretch it and stuff to fit. It'll do some zooming and cropping to get it to fit. And anything that happens in those cells, even other pictures, will end up showing up in that picture live. Every time you calculate the sheet, it'll go ahead and take CH2 to CM4 and just pop it in. So if I go into CH here and I just start typing around hello, you'll see the hello pop right up in the picture. And so that, using that little quirk of Excel, you can essentially have it reference another set of cells, which is this range that I merged together, this giant range of cells that contains a bunch of different layers of individual pictures, layers 13 here you can see, that you can set from code. And so each of them is set directly out of a graphics resources folder of transparent layer images that space everything for you. So all I have to do is go into my graphic resources folder if I want to make any changes. Go here to layers. You'll see I have a bunch of layers, like here's the branch symbol, here's the attack symbol, defense, discard, right? And you just set variables in the spreadsheet that define what each layer is going to use for its picture. And so I have all that set in the macros for these columns. There's a bunch of like text boxes on here, but that leads to the first issue, which is that some of the text boxes need to be diagonal. So let me go ahead and generate the wandering lines. You can see what I mean. I have in this top left corner, I can put a range and it'll generate those. Hit generate cards, and it'll pop up little thing, a little pop-up to tell you that it's generating cards. So this automatically makes the image and then exports it as a JPG to the folder specified up there, an export folder. But the hard part of making all the cards diagonal, besides like the graphic design of it, is that you have to wrap the text. So here it's doing the wrapping right now. The text wrapping is kind of complicated because it needs to wrap onto diagonal edges in the front and the back of the text box, and that's not a normal thing. And I couldn't find any automatic, like there was nothing built into anything to do that for me. So this wrapping where it's on like a slanted indent is something I had to define myself and code out myself. And that took a long time actually to get right, because it has to use these symbols. So these Kyoukai symbols are a special font that I made. Each of them translates to just one character. So it's like a Kyoukai symbols font. If I change it to something else, you'll see it's just the letter I. But as the Kyoukai symbols font, it's that symbol. And so it's that targeting symbol. And so those widths are weird. And most fonts don't have every character the same width. I'm trying to remember what the name of that is. It's not Unicode. It's something else. Regardless, setting it up so that it cares about that, and you can define like a pixel width and have the indent and line break stuff in the right places. But it is set up correctly now, and it works pretty much every time. You can just hit generate and throw it text, and it'll make everything work. So, long story short, the export works pretty well. And yeah, there it goes. So, what was I talking about? Yeah, besides that, there were also a bunch of graphic design issues with making cards diagonal. In particular, the fact that you get a lot of weird corners to deal with. And rather than dealing with them, I actually think you get a lot of value out of having those corners, because you can put weird information up there and it feels right. Like this little diamond of stats and card type. And this is what is essentially a skill tree branches. They all look really good in the corners, and this ready and resting thing actually look really good in the corner too. And that's actually that big like solid color block on the bottom, besides helping you tell in your hand like, oh, this is a normal spell, this is a fast card, these are summons, is that it helps you identify which cards are yours. So on a shared 5x5 grid, you have this issue where if your opponent puts a bunch of cards up, it's kind of hard to remember which ones are yours if they look from far away like a solid object. So this thing happened where we had to make sure the cards from far away looked like very obviously oriented. So this is obviously my card because there's a giant triangle at the bottom pointing at me. This is more obviously not my card because there's a giant triangle pointing at my opponent. The ready and resting symbols down here are so that you know how to tap it. Because another issue that happens when you have cards like this, and this would have happened even if they were straight up, is that when you tap them, it's not obvious if it's yours or theirs if you are both tapping the same way. So if I have a card like this, and they have a card like this, and I tap my card this way, and they for some reason tap their card the opposite way, now it looks like it's my card. So it's actually pretty important to put these obvious arrows down here that are just like, yeah, if I tap my card, I tap it so that it's resting, so that the resting is pointing at me, so I know it's my resting card. That might be something people have to get used to, especially because I know that not everyone taps this way, but I thought the cards looked best like this, so I have it, in this orientation. And I think it's not that weird. It's probably like one of those 50-50 things, but this will be a game where you can't do this for tapping, right? You have to actually turn it 90 degrees for the ready resting thing, to rest something. And so, the graphic design, hopefully, I think is good enough here for it to work in paper. There were a bunch of little issues. The digital version, of course, doesn't care about any of this. It highlights everything that's yours in blue and your opponent's in red, and does a lot of targeting stuff for you. So that makes things easier and resolves the cards for you too. Again, try out the tutorial, see what you think. Maybe you'll be interested in a full digital release of it eventually. But ahead of the Kickstarter, I am trying to get the digital client ready for you to play, do like light deck building and starter deck mirror matches, and mirror matches with the light deck building within the starter deck. This entrant, the participant, is borderless, so you can see it's just like white, and there's nothing around the edges. That means that he can only play cards. So these are generic cards. So a generic card is a card that any deck can play, and then there are cards whose borders match your entrance border, which this one doesn't have, and you can only play those. So there's 4 bordered entrants that have their own 30-card card pools. The generic card pool is 60 cards. I'm gonna have some light deck building within this card pool, but I'm working on getting code ready for the other ones, which is like, so for example, Sui, the spell shard researcher, has a bunch of cards that have her like fairy and gyms border, and that's in relation to the fact that she has her own card pool of cards that also, so these are the 4 entrants with their individual borders. Here's the Phoenix border, here's the Spirit Caller border, it's like flowers, here's the Ceiling Shadow border, which is like runes in the corners. And the reason I'm going with borders and not colors is because what I want to do, instead of doing a bunch of power creep on these entrants over time, is to release new entrants. So basically, we'll be able to cycle out, like in a rotation, we'll be able to rotate out entire borders. And rotate in new borders. And we're still going to keep borders around from set to set. We're not going to like rotate out every border every time. But here and there we can rotate borders out and then start entirely new card pools with balancing from scratch again. And then slowly add little bits of variety to their card pools over time in multiple sets before we cycle that out too. And we can also re-rotate back in borders over time. So kind of try to keep every card relevant forever and try to keep the demands of a modern card game being fresh and interesting all the time from forcing power creep, basically, is the solution we have to that. Is just to use borders with a texture so that we can like even reuse colors with completely new borders instead of running out of colors, basically, and being forced to like constantly power creep the existing cards. Being able to, and here you can see the mix of like, well, this deck is a lot of actual spell shard cards, but I think there's some generic, yeah, there's generic cards in here. And so being able to keep things interesting laterally instead of vertically will hopefully be nice in the long run if we get to have a long run. But yeah, so that's kind of how things have been going. And that's, I guess, why we are working on Kyoukai. We're just super into making cards and card games. The artist Mark has always been super into the way that Yu-Gi-Oh art has like a storyline throughout it, and this is like a good chance for us to do to make it something like that, and for him to really get into the weeds of making something cool like that. And you know, I've had a great time working with him on the story and the art, and the gameplay seems to be pretty fun too. So yeah, I'm gonna probably record a couple more of these about all sorts of different things, between not just like game and card design, but also probably like maybe dive into the code a little bit of the simulator that is coded in Godot. I heard a bunch about Godot being super user-friendly, although in retrospect, I found out recently Balatro was coded in Lua, I think. And I think, yeah, Balatro was coded in Lua, a variant of Lua called Love 2D. And I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro is also coded in Lua. So I actually have some regret that like there's so many card type things coded in Lua that maybe I should have just used Lua. But whatever, the quirks of Kyoukai fit well into what Godot was capable of. And so there wasn't a big reason not to build it all out in Godot. So that's where I am now. There's still some cards left to code. I need to code a branch mechanic, which I guess I can show here maybe. If I put a branch card in the starter deck, I don't remember if I did. I might not have. But branch cards are essentially, let me just show it on screen. Branch is a fun mechanic that takes advantage of another ISO RPG related thing, even though it's not really called branching in that sphere of games. Every card has a little skill tree in the top left corner, or I guess the left corner when it's turned, that shows some of its special abilities. That might be too big. That's an extra 0. And the way that works is that it kind of like, it's trying to say that like the special effects of the card are like a skill that it learned, and that's why they have names like Colossal Instinct. As you can see here, it can move, attack, or use a skill, so it's like a little RPG menu. And the skill is a normal skill, so you can't chain it to other stuff, and it's a movement skill. And so this has Colossal Instinct. It just moves it to an empty bordering zone. Lumbering Tortoise is just a massive stat creature, 15 attack, 9 defense, but 0 move. So it can't, when it tries to move for turn, it simply can't. So to move it, you have to use the skill, which means you also can't attack. So it's like a half-speed creature, implicitly. But you can also equip things to it, such as, let me see if I can find one real quick. I had to take all the art off because I was using a bunch of placeholder art, but I'm trying to use only real art now that we've got the game on Steam. Hidden Dagger, which is a fast gate. You can chain it to other stuff, and when you chain it, it has the passive branch skill of giving it 2 attack called Shadow's Edge. And you can think of a branch as a card that lets you teach a skill. So you put it under the other one, and you can see it lines up. The skill tree continues, and now it also knows Shadow's Edge. So now you've got a Lumbering Tortoise that has 17 attack, and you can chain that onto stuff so that it becomes 2 attack higher, so it's a battle trick. And so that's the way that branches work. They stack up in this direction and add more skills on, so you can choose for more skills, or they have gain passive skills and stuff like that. So that's the way that I have that working. It's another ISO RPG little reference that I think is cool. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say this time. These are kind of like stream of consciousness. I'm kind of just talking. I'll edit it down a little bit, but who's to say how much I'll actually feel like editing. Hopefully this format is easy to watch because it's easy for me to record in. And yeah, check out Kyoukai. Check it out on Steam. You can learn how to play there. You can learn there's a how to play video on YouTube. There's a rulebook on the website. So yeah, thanks for listening.